Hey, what's going on folks? My name is Gray and welcome to my favourite 16-bit RPGs follow-up, where I tread the controversial to some landscape of emulation to bring to you some of the greatest RPGs of their era that for one reason or another never saw official release outside of Japan in their lifetimes, but have in the intervening years since been translated and made available for free by fans for fans. So, in no particular order, the Tales of series by Namco, now Namco Bandai, has over the years toppled Final Fantasy from its perch and become arguably the #1 RPG franchise, and shows no sign of relinquishing that title anytime soon, which is quite the feat, even more so when you consider that the most important title in the series, the first, didn't get a Western release until 2006's lesser GBA release. Seriously, if you played that piss poor port, go back to the SNES translation and see the difference for yourself. The Saga franchise originally started out on the original Game Boy with a trilogy of traditional RPG titles known simply as Saga that would be released in the West as Final Fantasy Legend and developed a large cult following. The second trilogy of Saga titles for the SNES, known as Romancing Saga, unfortunately for whatever reason Square chose not to release outside Japan despite increased interest in the genre. The second SNES effort at least has been re-released to the mobile market, but for die-hard fans like myself, the only way to play them all is thanks to other die-hard fans. Oh, come on, there's always time for some magical schoolgirls, and as a big fan of the anime that would dominate the medium for much of the 90s, and also the average at best scrolling beat-em-ups, I decided to try this quirky RPG with the same look of disinterest on my face as you probably have right now watching this. But several hours later my dinner had gone cold and I had been hit with the realisation that this is one of the best RPGs I had played in a very long time. Try it yourselves and you'll see what I mean. Sadly, the Sega Mega Drive wouldn't be home to a fraction of the amount of RPGs that Super Famicom owners had in their back pockets. But thankfully, the fan translators would make available to us some of the few top-tier Mega Drive titles that otherwise would be lost to retro gamers. Rent-A-Hero, developed by Sega legend Yu Suzuki, should be talked about with the same reverence as Golden Axe, Shinobi and Streets of Rage. A sequel followed on the Dreamcast, but that too never left Japan. Released at the height of the Tamagotchi craze that would sweep the globe briefly, Wonder Project J has you raising a young artificial boy and teaching him right from wrong. Virtually unknown in the West, this was popular enough in Japan to get a direct sequel on the N64, so if you're fed up of always playing as the chosen hero destined to save the world, then give this Enix stunner a try. It's brilliant. Until very recently, the Dragon Quest franchise was seen in the West as very much a second-rate series when compared to Final Fantasy. In Japan, however, it was a very different story, as Enix's Dragon Quest would outsell their once rivals Square's Final Fantasy with each and every release, leading to a famous incident where the Japanese government would pass a law to stop Dragon Quest games being released on weekdays, as there was so much truancy from Square schools and sick days from work with each game's launch that it affected the economy. And while most, if not all, the earlier games in this series have seen official re-release, for many years fan translations were the only way any of us could see firsthand what all the fuss was about. The anime that this is based on, despite being one of my all-time favourites, even today has struggled to make much of an impression on anime fans in the West, raised on Dragon Ball and Naruto. So the game was never in contention for Western release, then or now. But this slick RPG, which I think is a port of the Sharp X68000 release, is every bit as good as the Hideaki Anno anime on which it was based, that has remained very popular in Japan. So much so that there would be video games about it released for the NES to the PS2 and for many other systems in between. Square's final release for the Super Nintendo before they would repeat their 16-bit success on the 32-bit PlayStation, only this time on a worldwide scale. Rudora no Hero, which translates to Treasures of the Rudras, is an ambitious and in its day groundbreaking RPG which has received a number of re-releases in Japan on the Virtual Console. But despite fan translations existing since at least the early 2000s, Square keep telling us that its complex storyline and magic system would be too difficult to translate as the reason why even now they won't allow English speakers to enjoy this masterpiece. While the perception of JRPGs in the West seems to be, if you've played one, you've played them all, in reality however, there has always been many subgenres, like the grid-based tactical RPG, a genre I first developed an interest in the 32-bit era, thanks to games like Mystaria, Dragon Force and Vandal Hearts. But if I'm honest, the tactical RPG reached its zenith in the 16-bit era with this one, Bahamut Lagoon. Square actually planned to release this title to the States, but Nintendo blocked it to focus on the N64. The pricks. One of the first animes that I would get into in a massive way, back when translated Japanese animation was being marketed in the West to an older teenage male audience, with titles like Fist of the North Star, Akira, Urotsui Ko Doji and Project Eiko spearheading the anime boom. Sadly, few video games tried to piggyback that success, so great titles like 3x3 Eyes were beyond the reach of fans around the world. In fact, I'm not entirely sure if every 3x3 Eyes video game was fan translated, as there were quite a few, but this SNES effort was warmly welcomed by me and every other fan of Pai and Yakumo's adventures. When we talk of the countries of origin of great video games, Taiwan is not exactly known as a hotbed of top quality software, but Beggar Prince, a Chinese language RPG released at the very end of the 16-bit era in 1998 exclusively for the Mega Drive. Many years later it would be hailed as one of the best titles to grace the system when Super Fighter Team translated and sold it around the world, starting something of a fad as Pierce Solar would follow a similar pattern. The first fan-translated game I vividly remember playing, back at the turn of the century, but the fan translation scene is bigger than just gaming, as at the same time I would become hooked on fan-translated Japanese TV shows like Hanayori Dango, Trick, Shomuni, Gokuzen and dozens of others. But despite those wonderful distractions, I remember being very impressed at what was my first real experience of the long-running Dragon Quest franchise. I know this installment has its detractors, largely because it's compared to Final Fantasy VI, but it's a solid adventure in its own right and well worth sinking a few hours into.
Get it on the screen.
An enormous shockwave is approaching.
Feel the spirit.
While the RPG stereotype is a Western-style medieval setting for most titles, science fiction, particularly Blade Runner-style cyberpunk, would also come to be a common sight. But there is nothing by the numbers when it comes to Tri-Ace and Enix's RPG space opera series, Star Ocean, which has, despite going off the rails somewhat with recent entries in the franchise, consistently been a top seller. But like Tales of Phantasia, for many years emulation was the only way to play the first game, until a PSP update entitled Star Ocean First Departure finally got a Western release, though personally I still prefer the original SNES version. Now they say you should save the best until last, but what do you say we squeeze in one more game? And it was going to be one of the many top quality SNES Fire Emblem games, but you know what? I rarely get the opportunity to talk about anime, so indulge me. Now, Tenchi Muyo might be thought of today as the show that popularised the harem genre. That's still a staple of most anime, but this straight-to-video OVA series actually still holds up really well today, and the video games based on it are still surprisingly entertaining to boot. To my knowledge though, none of the other versions for the PS1 or Saturn have been translated, but thankfully this SNES effort retains the charm, humour and oddball characters from the much loved series. Check it out. So there we have it folks, we've come to the end of the video, but not the end of the series, as in the next episode I'll be taking you on a CD gaming tour with my favourite 32-bit RPGs. So please like and share this video and let me know what RPGs are your favourites. And also, do you want to see me expand this series and maybe take a look at 8-bit role players? Talk to me, let me know. So as always, more videos up soon, so thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.